This is Kurt Polish with the Madison ModPo Group. Today we are going to talk about Eyes by Edwin Rolfe. Jim will lead us in discussion, but first I should introduce Lou to my left. This is Scott, Roger, and Jim. So, Jim,
Thank
take it away.
Thank you, Kurt. Good to see you all in my house today, and good thoughts for Martha. About Eyes, Edwin Rolfe. I want to get to the poem in a minute, but I thought I'd say something about him. And if you guys have something to throw in, that'd be great too. He was born in 1909, 2 years before my father, and died in 54 at 45. Son of Russian Jews. His name was Solomon Fishman, his birth name. Paterson, New Jersey. Father was a socialist, and his mother was an advocate for birth control. And I have a good friend from college who wrote a book on Nellie Roussel, who was a famous French feminist advocate for birth control in France. And it reminded me of her and her scholarship. Thank you for letting me get that in. He was affiliated with the Communist Party, which meant probably that he was attracted to the revolution and Leninism, and of course not terribly knowledgeable about what Stalin was really up to at the time, and communist ideals. I don't know how much, whether he was a fellow traveler or whether he was it seemed to me that he wasn't an ardent leader of the CP in the U.S., but he was affiliated with it. And he became a member of or joined the Lincoln Brigade. You all are familiar with that?
Sure.
I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, and our icon, who recently died, was Clarence Kalin in Madison, who was also a member of the Lincoln Brigade, famous Madisonian. And we called ourselves the Madison Clarence Kalin chapter of Veterans for Peace. And so he was in the revolutionary left of the 20s and the 30s and inspired to join the anti-Franco forces in Spain. And so I would say that this particular poem is very much marked by his experience.
You know, did he get to Spain?
Yes.
Yes.
He fought in the...
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Thank you. And this poem is clearly affected by his experience of war. The other thing is, I don't know if you know much about the air war in the Spanish Civil War.
Go ahead. if you have some
Okay,
details.
I'll say, and then you guys can contribute.
Well, there was a lot of collateral damage.
There was indeed a lot of collateral damage. It was a bit like Yemen today, I would suspect. But it was also a proving grounds for the Nazis, like a training ground. And the Luftwaffe was getting some valuable experience in this war. And so that was an element in the process of bombing these villages and cities.
Doesn't Picasso's Guernica
Yes.
directly
Yes,
reflect the sort of
Yes,
thing you're describing?
that's right. Now, back to his poetry.
Would you like to read it?
Sure, let's do that. Since it goes over, I'm going to have it out like this so I see it properly. Edwin Rolfe, About Eyes. The terror of the serene plains is in their eyes. Look deeply. See the wings dip, and the revolving nose split sky and cloud. 10,000 feet above the remembered city of women with violent hearts, incredibly aged children, dark-eyed, who recall the propeller's sound and the panic from the days of the womb's darkness. The eyes contain, reflect more than the imaged photographed in the almanacs, the newspapers, the albums airmen are fond of. The joy of the plunge through mist into sun is unknown to the wide, anonymous eyes of the dwellers in bombed cities. The eyes reveal everything. The superhuman grace of the silver flight and the first melodic hum, deceitful, cruel, of the synchronized guns and motors and the arc plummet fall of the bombs, the grotesque explosion, the hysteria of the insane siren, the last deception. And gasp. I have a few thoughts, but I would prefer to hear from all of you.
It might be worthwhile just to go through the poem and see every place where he uses the word eyes.
There you go. That was the first point I was going to make. All right.
Well,
So why don't you start us off?
should have kept my mouth shut. So we got eyes in the first line. The terror of the plains, of the serene plain, is in their eyes. And I assume by their eyes that means if they're experiencing terror, they're the people on the ground. And
Which is, I'm going to interject a few things, and I don't mean
Please
to
do.
interrupt you. Point of view is a very big part of this. And obviously we're seeing it from the point of view of the people bombed.
in this instance,
In this instance,
yeah.
exactly.
And look deeply, see the wings dip. So we're looking into the eyes, and we see the plane. Then we have in the third stanza, the children who are dark-eyed. The fourth stanza, we have the eyes contained, which is a beautiful stanza. The eyes reveal everything. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth stanza. So yeah, I think that's it, unless I've missed some. And is it always where I've wondered, are the eyes referred to in all instances the people on the ground, or in some instances do the eyes refer to what the pilot is seeing, or pilots?
I have an opinion.
Please.
I think they refer to the people on the ground, but that they point out the contrast between what the pilots might think they're experiencing as seen by the people on the ground, which would be the serene plains and the superhuman grace of the silver flight. So that would be an attempt to honor the image photographed in the almanacs as the story of what my great training experience in Spain was like. And then, of course, the dark, grotesque, ugly aspect of being bombed.
We also have the airmen, who are the ones collecting the albums.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if it's their eyes of the airmen, what they're seeing because of the particular reference.
The way I read that sentence, it says, their eyes contain, the people in the city, reflect more than the image photographed in the almanacs, the newspapers. The albums airmen are fond of.
Yeah.
So there would be people photographing this in the Nazi army, Air Force, whatever, the Luftwaffe, and they would collect photographs and give you an album. I have an album from my tour in Vietnam, if you'd like to see it. This is an old story.
And so, but the next stanza after that, the joy of the plunge. It has to be at least an imagined anticipation of what the pilot's feeling.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
I think that they get a glimpse of that. But then there's a deceitful turn in it all, which is announced by sirens and bombs going off, that this is really not, an arcade experience.
Yeah, but the airmen never experience that.
No, not
The
at all.
pilots never get to see what they do or never get to feel what they do. This brought to me a specific image in my life, and that is I was a Boy Scout guy, and I had a friend, a doctor friend, who had been a fighter pilot in the Korean War. And he had a plane, and he took us up. And one of the things he did was to fly into a big black cloud and then turn and come down out of the cloud into the sunshine. And it's magnificent. It's absolutely magnificent. And he loved it,
Sure.
And fighter pilots are a breed apart that I've known some in the Navy, and they can't possibly live with what they do, and so they reject it. I mean, they don't truly comprehend what they do.
Mhm.
The damage that they do in these days with the jet planes. And then the other thing is that this was practice for Hitler. They practiced on these people that were defenseless, and the whole, the ME-109 was just new, and they were playing with what they could do with and it had a special screen. Does anybody know that?
No.
No.
In
Tell
the
us about
Second
it.
World War, the Germans put a special noise-making apparatus on the dive bombers. So when they turned down and started down, they made a horrible screeching noise that everybody in Europe knew that the bombers were bombing, that they were coming and making a noise. It was a terror.
The first melodic hum
Pardon?
in the
Yeah, and
poem.
it mentions that in here.
Deceitful and cruel.
So, anyway, that was my
Oh,
thoughts
that was
on
great.
this poem.
Isn't this brilliant? And
And the eyes, that trope, the thing I sent around.
right.
Mhm.
Synecdoche.
Mhm.
Play that role here, and it's really
But-
powerful.
I think they're also an appeal to, back to philosophy and existentialism. How do you experience, as a human being, what is your experience? What is your existential, what is the phenomena what are the phenomena that you experience that affect your thinking and your memory? And it's your senses that bring that in, and the eyes are playing a critical
Eyes
role.
especially, yeah.
Yes.
Well, what is the last deception?
The siren. Ha! The bombs are going off. How do you like that? And they've already gone off.
Right. But is the siren itself the deception, or is the siren something like it's going off, but it's futile, like you suggest?
Sure.
Well, the grace of the silver flight,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And then the sound of the propellers, which we don't hear anymore, but at that time, all these planes were propeller planes.
Good point.
And they
Good
all
point.
had nose guns, because there weren't any gun sights on these planes. They just had a circle on the windshield. And whatever you could see in the circle on the windshield is what your nose was aimed at, and that's
Which-
what
expanded the
shooting.
collateral
Yeah,
damage.
so that's all very romantic. And then
Absolutely.
the results of what happens are anything but romantic. They're the
Grotesque.
opposite of romantic.
Yeah.
He gets so much power from the contrast that he brings.
That's the
Yeah,
point I was making
right.
about contrast.
The terror of the serene plane.
Right.
It's brilliant.
That's
Mhm.
right. I mean, there's an aspect of war that is easily romanticized and sold in popular literature to the population that hasn't been to war. And it's easily sold.
What about the line, the panic from the days of the womb's darkness?
Yeah, and what's a woman with violent heart?
I have opinions about these, but I'm going to shut up.
No, I'd like to hear it.
No, I don't
I think that what he's getting to is that we experience our world through our senses, but our mind plays a role in organizing it, and there's an interactive way, and nobody's ever going to figure out how that works exactly. But what happens is that your eyes witness this. It becomes part of your memory, and it affects your heart. It alters who you are as a human being. And so, where are you likely to create women with violent hearts, with anger, with desire for revenge in a setting like this?
Well, and maybe also it's city of women because the men have gone off to fight.
It's bombing civilians. It's like Yemen. The story could be told from Yemen every day in the nightly news, and the Saudis and the Americans are complicit in that.
Something that's, again, I forget the word, but you know what's happening in Spain right now?
Yes.
You know what this war was about? It was,
Oh, Franco, right.
okay, and what are they doing now, this week, in Spain, do you know?
No.
Are you talking about
They're
Barcelona?
exhuming Franco from his tomb
That's right.
and getting rid of him
That's right.
because he's no longer, he's an enigma now to Spain.
You know, talking about exhuming Franco, there's also a strong movement to find Lorca's grave
Mm.
Uh-huh.
and to build a proper memorial to Lorca.
That's another one. Yeah. These memories don't go away, and they just keep percolating. And yeah, brilliant,
So-
brilliantly done.
Circling back to Days of the Womb's Darkness.
Yeah.
You know, okay, so the fetus, who knows, but would be dark in there, presumably.
Sure.
But the notion that there would be panic from the days of the womb's darkness, where normally you would think of that as the safe haven, you know, you're not born yet, you're hanging out, protected, and
Don't you experience what your mother experiences? So while you're in the womb and she's witnessing bombing
I
around
think
her?
that's a good read.
Yeah,
The days of the wombs.
I think that's what he's talking about.
Panic from the days of the womb's darkness. I couldn't make sense.
Well, it alliterates with propeller, so perhaps the sound connection there helps us understand what the women, the mothers to be, have experienced are the propeller sound and the panic, as Jim is suggesting, that the mothers have, that is transferred to the fetus.
There's an intimate relationship between a woman and a fetus.
Yeah.
And you would know that better than any of us.
It turns out the womb isn't all that dark
Ah,
because light does penetrate and then the redness of blood reflects the light down into the uterus, and there is light in the uterus. Very dull, but there is some light. Then the other thing I was thinking of that is usually women that are carrying babies are happy. they're looking forward to their babies being born.
Uh,
But in wartime, they're worried that they're going to bear sons that they're going to lose, so that their children are going to suffer in the war. So maybe womb's darkness means women thinking of the suffering of the children they might bear during the war. That's the best I could do.
This may be far-fetched, but could the womb's darkness refer to the gestation of fascism?
Mm.
So it doesn't have anything to do with a mother-fetus relationship, but it's where fascism
Is
was born.
was born.
and is being nurtured by these. I think that's a very good observation.
Well, this other stanza, the eyes contain more than photographs, newspapers. It's brilliant, sort of as if to say, you really don't, you, the reader, back where you're reading the New York Times, just cannot possibly appreciate the terror.
Exactly. Very well said, Kurt. So if you go through the Airman's Almanac, you have proof, I guess, that he was here, but what are you really seeing? I think that's a very good point.
Well, we have this poem thanks to Al, who suggested it.
May I add one other thing about this poem? I found just reading the last words of every line as a kind of sub-poem, as really reflective of what he's getting at. May I do that?
Sure.
Go for it.
Okay. Eyes, nose, above, hearts, recall, panic, darkness, photographed of two cities, grace, hum, motors, explosion, deception.
It's a poem.